Two brothers, one castle, and for an entire week at Balmoral, they never once sat in the same room. That is the ending everyone reached for, and the hard word they hung on it was refusal. But in this dramatized account, the ending is the very part that misleads you. Hold that ending in your mind, because we're going to rewind 11 days to the single sentence that explains it, and that sentence turns the whole story inside out. Because William didn't say no to Harry. In this telling, he said one thing first, and it wasn't cold, and it wasn't cruel. It was a condition. Whatever this meeting is, it happens with no cameras, no press, no announcement, nothing that turns two brothers into a headline. That's the refusal the world was shocked by. And read the right way, it isn't a door slammed shut. It's a door held open, on the one term that might let something real walk through it. Let me tell you how I read stories like this one, because it changes what you'll take from the next 20 minutes. I don't watch the palace for the drama. I watch the mechanics underneath it. How a family that lives its entire life in public tries, occasionally, to do one private thing. And what I've learned is that the hardest thing this family ever attempts isn't a wedding, or a funeral, or a coronation. It's a quiet, unwatched moment between two people who are hurt, because everything they do gets photographed, briefed, leaked, and sold, and you cannot heal a wound in a shop window. So let me be honest with you up front, the way a lot of channels won't be. This is a dramatized story. What's real is the foundation. Balmoral genuinely is the family's most private place. William and Harry genuinely have lived through a long and painful distance, and the modern royal reality genuinely is that almost nothing they do stays off the record. Those pieces are true. But this specific meeting, this specific condition, and these specific reactions are interpretation. A story built on what we know about these brothers and this place, not a leak, not a scene I witnessed. And I want to be clear about the framing, because it inverts the expected story. This is not a tale of one brother shutting out another. In this telling, there's no villain and no cruelty. William, setting his condition, is a brother trying to protect something fragile, not to punish Harry, but to give a reconciliation the one thing it needs to have a chance. And Harry, wanting to meet, is a brother reaching for his family. Both men are sympathetic. The refusal is the opposite of what it looks like. Because this was never really about whether William would meet Harry. It was about whether the meeting could be real, or whether it would be consumed as spectacle before it even began. And about how easily we turn a careful, protective condition into a cold rejection, because a feud is a better story than a brother trying to guard the possibility of peace. Keep that one sentence in your mind. No cameras, no press. We start with what it actually asks for. Let's take the condition seriously, because to understand this story, you have to understand that it isn't a wall, it's a request. The public heard condition and translated it instantly into obstacle, as if William had set a hurdle designed to make sure the meeting never happened. But read the words themselves. No cameras, no press, no announcement, nothing pre-briefed to a friendly outlet, nothing confirmed by sources the next morning, nothing turned into content. Every part of that condition points in a single direction, and it isn't away from Harry. It's away from the audience. Think about what that actually removes. It removes the thing that has, in this telling, poisoned nearly every attempt these two have made to talk. Because in a family this watched, the meeting is never just the meeting. There's the meeting, and then there's the version of the meeting that gets sold. Who arrived first, who looked away, whose body language said everything, which side briefed which paper by lunchtime. The condition strips all of that out. It says, whatever happens between us, it belongs to us. And that's a strange kind of refusal, because it protects the very thing it's accused of denying. A man who wanted to avoid his brother wouldn't need conditions. He'd just decline. He'd send a regret through an aide, and let the distance do the rest. You only set terms for a meeting you're trying to make possible. Terms are what you build when you want the thing to survive contact with the world. Refusal is silence. A condition is the opposite of silence. It's someone still at the table, still negotiating, still trying to find the shape that works. So picture the moment in this account. Balmoral, the one place that was never about being royal, only about being family. And William, before anything else, asking for the one guarantee that would let it stay a family matter instead of becoming a story. Not, I won't see you. But if I see you, it can't be for them. Here's the quiet weight of that. And it's the opposite of a snub, because the condition is protective. It protects Harry, too, from being managed and photographed and turned into a headline in his own reconciliation. It protects the meeting from the pressure that has broken every earlier one. It protects the fragile possibility that two brothers might actually say something true to each other. But the condition is just the object. What it's protecting, that's the real subject. Forget the specific condition now. I want to show you the real thing at work, because it reframes not just this moment, but the whole long story of these two brothers. The second object here is privacy, not as secrecy, but as soil. The plain, unglamorous truth that certain living things can only grow unwatched. A seed doesn't sprout on a stage, and a reconciliation, a real one, between two people who have hurt each other, is one of those things. It needs darkness before it needs daylight. It needs to be allowed to be clumsy, and unfinished, and human, before anyone else gets to see it. The moment you put it under lights, it stops being a reconciliation and becomes a performance of one. That's the handoff. The condition was object one, the specific, spoken thing. Privacy as soil is object two, the principle underneath, and the thing that reveals what William was really doing. Because William, in this telling, isn't using the condition to keep Harry out. He's using it to build the one environment where his brother could actually come back in. A space with no cameras, because he understands, maybe better than anyone alive, that the cameras are exactly what killed every previous attempt. And here's why that matters so much, and why it's so easily misread. Because from the outside, protecting a thing and refusing a thing look identical. When William sets the condition, and the meeting doesn't happen on the world's terms, an observer sees only that it didn't happen, which looks like a refusal, a snub, a brother turning away. What the observer can't see is the protective logic behind it, that William would rather have no photographed, briefed, hollow meeting than have that, because a hollow meeting doesn't heal anything. It just gives everyone a new set of pictures to argue over. And there's something deeply characteristic of William in this, because William, of all of them, learned earliest and hardest what it costs when a family's private pain becomes public property. He grew up watching the people he loved photographed through the worst days of their lives. So it's entirely in character that the one thing he'd guard, fiercely, is the wall between what's real and what's for sale, even at the price of being called cold for guarding it. So the refusal, in this telling, is really a condition for meeting, not against it. And to be fair to that reading, I have to be honest about its limits. Now let me argue against my own story, because you deserve it, and because anyone who won't argue against themselves shouldn't be trusted. Here's the strongest version of the other side. You could say I've taken a plain, painful thing. One brother didn't want to see the other, and dressed it up in a flattering costume. That William was protecting the reconciliation is exactly the kind of generous spin that lets you avoid the simpler possibility, that the distance between them is real, that the hurt runs both ways, and that sometimes a condition is just a polite way of saying no. And you could add, fairly, setting terms on a family meeting can itself be a kind of power move. The one who sets the conditions is the one in control. Both those objections are fair. It's true that I'm choosing the generous reading, and I can't prove there wasn't genuine reluctance underneath the condition. Real brothers have real rifts, and not every careful word is secretly kind. And there's a real asymmetry in one person getting to set the terms. That can feel less like protection and more like a gate, however well meant. But watch what the protective reading still gets right, even accounting for those. Because the core insight isn't "William definitely felt warm." It's that the condition, whatever the feeling behind it, points at the audience and not at Harry. A man saying "no cameras" is not a man saying "not you." He's a man saying "not like this." And in a family where every previous attempt has been eaten alive by exactly the exposure the condition forbids, insisting on privacy isn't the least generous reading of his motive. It's the most plausible one. So the reading doesn't have to pretend the pain isn't there. It can hold both, that the distance is real and that the condition was, at minimum, an attempt to meet on the only terms where the distance might actually close. So I'll hold both. Maybe there was genuine reluctance the condition was partly hiding. And the protective reading, grounded in what this specific man has lived through with the press, is a legitimate and generous way to understand an ambiguous moment, one that refuses the lazy feud narrative in favor of something truer to who these brothers likely are. And who William is the key to all of it. So let's talk about who William actually is, because the whole protective reading rests on his character, and his character genuinely supports it. William is, by every account, the most guarded, most institution-minded member of his generation, and there's a specific reason for that, and it isn't coldness. He is the boy who grew up inside the machine that turns private grief into public spectacle. He watched it aimed at his mother. He walked behind her coffin as a child, while the entire world watched his face for a reaction, and learned, far too young, that his pain was other people's content. You do not come through that without forming one deep, permanent conviction, that some things must be kept off the record, or they don't survive. And a person shaped like that has a particular relationship to cameras and to family. He isn't guarded because he doesn't feel things. He's guarded because he feels them and refuses to hand them over. He's the kind of man who would rather be misread as cold than let something precious be turned into a headline. So the idea that he would set a condition, no cameras, no press, before meeting the brother he's been estranged from, is entirely consistent with who he is. It's the most William thing in the whole story. And crucially, William is not Harry's enemy. Whatever the distance between them, they are the two boys who held each other's hands through the single worst thing that ever happened to either of them. That bond doesn't vanish. It just gets buried under years of hurt and headlines. So the framing of William coldly refusing Harry misses the structural truth. These are not two rivals. They're two survivors of the same loss. And the thing William is guarding, privacy, is the exact thing whose absence hurt them both, most, when they were young. And there's a tenderness in imagining it this way. Because William, who has spent his whole life building a wall between his family's real feelings and the world's appetite for them, insisting that a meeting with his brother stay behind that wall, is not a man closing a door. He's a man saying, if we do this, we do it as brothers, not as a story. And letting the world call that a refusal, rather than explain himself, is, itself, exactly the kind of privacy he's fighting for. And Harry, on the other side of this, deserves his fairness too. Let me be fair to Harry here, because the protective reading must not turn him into the problem, and it doesn't have to. Because wanting to meet, wanting connection, reaching for your brother, none of that is a fault. Harry is, in this telling, the one doing the braver and more vulnerable thing, reaching out across a long silence, risking rejection, wanting his family back. That takes more courage than staying away. And if a part of him wanted the meeting to be seen, to be acknowledged publicly, to have the reconciliation matter out loud, that's human too. When you've felt pushed out, being quietly let back in isn't always enough. Sometimes you need the door to be open where people can see it, because the exclusion was public, and you want the return to be public too. So there's a real, sympathetic tension here, and it isn't villain against hero. It's two brothers who both want the same thing, to be brothers again, and who need slightly different things to get there. William needs the meeting to be invisible, because visibility is what has always broken it. Harry may need it to be acknowledged, because invisibility can feel like being hidden all over again. Both needs are legitimate. Both come from the same wound, pointing in opposite directions. And there's a reading here that honors Harry rather than diminishing him. Because Harry, reaching out at all, knowing he might be told, "Not like this," knowing the terms might not be his, is doing the thing estrangement makes hardest. He keeps the door on his side open. A more bitter man would have stopped trying. Harry, in this telling, keeps trying. That's not weakness, and it's not naivety. That's a brother who hasn't given up, which is its own quiet form of strength. So the relationship between the two men, in this account, isn't refusal against longing. It's two people fumbling toward the same reunion with different instincts about how to survive it. One guards the privacy, the other guards the hope. And neither instinct is a fault. They're just two different ways of protecting the same thing. And the tragedy, if there is one here, isn't that either of them is wrong. It's that both are right, and that the very exposure William is trying to escape is part of what makes Harry need the acknowledgement. The condition and the longing come from the same place. Two brothers who were hurt, in public, a long time ago. And what the whole episode reveals, about privacy and healing and how we read distance, is the last piece. So here's what this story really reveals, in this account, and it's a truth about how quick we are to call a boundary a rejection. It reveals our hunger to read every condition as a wall. The moment someone says yes, but only like this, we hear the only and miss the yes. We're primed to treat any term as a barrier, any boundary as a snub, any request for privacy as a form of exclusion. And so we routinely misread the most careful protective acts as their opposite, because the caution is visible and the care underneath it is not. The person setting a gentle condition looks like they're building a gate, when often they're building the one safe room where a hard conversation could actually happen. And this story, in this telling, is a corrective to that reflex. Because the refusal between William and Harry wasn't a refusal at all. It was a term of protection, an attempt to give a fragile thing the conditions it needed to live. The rejection existed only in the eye of observers primed to expect a feud. The reality was one brother trying to build a room with no cameras in it, so that something true might be said in it. And seeing that requires resisting the feud narrative long enough to ask, what if this isn't a door closing? What if it's a door being held open on the only terms that would let anyone walk through? There's a deeper lesson, too, about the things that can only happen unwatched. Because some of the most important moments in any life, an apology, a forgiveness, a first honest word after a long silence, cannot survive an audience. They need privacy, the way a photograph needs darkness to develop. Expose them too early, and they're ruined. And a family that has spent its whole existence being watched knows this in its bones, that the price of their public life is that their private healing has to be guarded twice as hard, or it never gets to happen at all. So William, in this telling, setting his condition and letting the world call it a refusal, is a small model of a hard kind of love, the kind that protects the possibility of repair by keeping it off the stage, and accepts being misunderstood, because the repair mattered more than the reputation. Which brings us to the truth this whole story has been building toward. So let me finally say the thing this whole story has been circling. What was the condition really, the one that shocked everyone once they understood it? That William never refused to meet Harry. In this telling, what he refused was to let the meeting become a media event. The condition, no cameras, no press, no announcement, wasn't a barrier against his brother. It was a wall against the world, built precisely so that his brother could come through. The refusal everyone was shocked by was, read correctly, the most hopeful thing in the whole story. A man protecting the possibility of a real reconciliation from being consumed as spectacle before it could even begin. Think about how completely that inverts the story. Everyone saw one brother turning another away and reached for the obvious narrative: coldness, cruelty, a feud with a winner and a loser. And the truth, in this telling, is the opposite in every respect. Not a refusal to meet, but a condition for meeting. Not shutting Harry out, but shutting the cameras out. Not a door slammed, but a door held open on the one term that might let something real walk through. Not the end of a relationship, an attempt to give it the only conditions under which it could restart. And the reason it shocked everyone, once understood, is that it forced a reckoning with how wrong the assumption was. People had built a whole feud on a rejection that, read the right way, was an act of protection. And discovering that the refusal was actually a brother guarding the fragile chance of healing, that overturns not just this story, but the whole lazy habit of reading every royal boundary as a snub. It's genuinely shaking to find that the door you were sure had been slammed was, in fact, being held open with both hands. So the condition he set was the best-kept secret of all, that it was never a rejection, only a protection, one brother insisting that if they were going to try to come back to each other, they'd do it as brothers, not as a headline. That's not a scandal, it's the opposite of one. It's the kind of quiet, stubborn, protective hope that happens all the time between estranged people who haven't quite given up, and that we miss all the time, because we're looking for a fight. So here's my honest verdict, and then a question, and then I'll let you go. Everyone saw a refusal, one brother declining to meet another at the family's most private place. Almost no one considered the truth this story offers, that it wasn't a refusal but a condition, a brother trying to protect a fragile reconciliation from being turned into spectacle, and accepting the world's misreading rather than explaining himself. The condition he set was that there be no cameras, which was really the door held open, not shut. Strip away the drama, if you like. Doubt the specific meeting. Doubt the exact words. Take only what's real. Balmoral is the family's most private place. These two brothers have lived a long and public distance, and almost nothing this family does stays off the record. Even the plain version holds the lesson this story tells, that we reach far too quickly for the rejection narrative and miss the protection, the boundary, the careful term that is actually trying to make something possible, and that the truest acts of care often look, from outside, exactly like their opposite. Nobody in this is a villain, and that's the whole point. Not William, whose refusal was a wall against the cameras, not his brother. Not Harry, whose reaching out was courage, not intrusion. The only real antagonist is our own hunger for a feud, the reflex that turns two grieving brothers, fumbling toward each other, into a story with a villain, and misses the hope underneath. So here's my question, and I mean it, because I read the replies. Has someone ever said a condition you first heard as a rejection, a not like this, a not yet, a boundary you mistook for a door closing, and only later understood that the condition was the thing making it possible at all? Because this story's real lesson isn't about two princes. It's that the people who protect something fragile by keeping it private are often the ones we misjudge, and that learning to hear the yes inside the "but only like this" is one of the kindest things we can learn to do. Tell me below, not for the algorithm, because underneath the palace, this is really a question about privacy and repair and the doors that are only held open on one quiet condition. The two brothers never met at Balmoral that week, and what shocked everyone wasn't the refusal. It was slowly understanding that there wasn't one, only a brother saying, "If we do this, we do it as family, and not for them."